Um, so I wanted to just review that. Last week we spoke about why there's so many details. And the answer for that basically that we explained was that in life, we always have to go back to the metaphor of a relationship, or the paradigm of a relationship, and think about our own relationships and apply that knowledge to our relationship with Hashem. So in a relationship, it's the details that show that we care, right? And I think I gave an example that it's a couple is celebrating an anniversary, and he's in charge of making the plans, and she comes downstairs and she's all ready to go, and she says, "Okay, honey, what are we doing to celebrate?" And he says, I didn't really think about it. I don't know. You want to grab a bite? You want to go to a movie? But that is a surefire way of showing that you do not care, right? And the way to show that you cared is to have a whole special evening planned out with all the details. We're gonna go to the place, the exact place where we met for the first time, and I'm wearing the sweater that I was wearing that night that we met, and then we're gonna go to your favorite restaurant, and I already ordered your favorite meal there. So the details matter. The details are what make a relationship important, what shows the other person that I'm really truly invested in this relationship. And the way I show that is being very, very concerned and careful with not just the general, but the details also. Why so many mitzvot? We asked that last week. We spoke about that. Why are there so many? Why does it have to be 613? And then, each mitzvah has a whole, bookshelf worth of subcategories of mitzvot. Why is it so important for there to be so many? And one of the things that we said was that because there are so many mitzvot, a moment doesn't go by in our lives where we are not given an opportunity to connect to Hashem. And that's really why Hashem created us in the first place, to have that connection with Him. And by giving us so many mitzvahs, He's giving us constant opportunity. So when I get dressed in the morning, I have opportunities to do mitzvahs. What I put on, what I don't put on, and what order I put it on, and do I, check my clothes for wool and linen. Everything I do has an opportunity for me to be able to do mitzvahs and serve Hashem. And then the last thing we focused on was, how do we relate to our mitzvahs? Do we relate to them in the way that we weigh potatoes at Mariano's, by the pound? I'll take a 5-pound sack, give or take, a few ounces, a few whatever. Do we do it that way, or do we say no? We weigh our mitzvahs like the way that a jeweler weighs gold, the nearest thousandth of a gram. In other words, how much care and attention and focus and energy are we investing into our mitzvahs? And that's really ultimately a question that's up to us to decide for ourselves. How do we want to relate to our mitzvahs? Do we want to relate to them in general, in a sort of general way? Yeah, I do my mitzvahs. I keep kosher. I'm not so careful with, the details, but I don't eat pork, and I don't mix milk and meat. Or do I say, no, you know what? I'm very, very careful. I make sure that all the food that I have has correct supervision and the correct texture. It's just different approaches. And ultimately, it's up to you. You decide how much or how little or where or in what areas, when you want to be investing in the relationship. Wait, someone's trying to get in. Okay, so excellent. That was the basic summary of last week. Now, if we continue where we left off, we are on page 38 on the bottom. In a sort of masterful way, I think the Ramchal basically offers a one-sentence summary of what we have covered so far. So he says, thus, we have learned Ikar Mitzias Adam Ba'olam Hazeh Hu Rak Hayei Mitzvos. The essential purpose of a man's existence in this world is only to fulfill mitzvos, the la'avod, and to serve Hashem, the la'amod b'nisayon, and to withstand the tests that one faces. Okay, so he says, let's just pause here for a second. He's saying what's the main purpose of our existence? Now, it's an interesting thing. Like if you were to just kind of in conversation with friends, or around the dinner table, or around the Shabbat table, or whatever, ask people around you, what is the main purpose of our existence? I'm sure you'd get a lot of different answers, and I'm sure it would be a fascinating discussion, right? And some people would probably say, the main purpose of our existence is to be a good person. Or some people might say the main purpose of our existence is tikkun olam. Or someone might say, maybe not too many people would admit this, but someone might, in a moment of honesty, admit that they think that the purpose of our existence is to have fun, and to enjoy ourselves, and to have a good time. People are going to come up with different answers about this question: what is the purpose of our existence? And the Ramchal is telling us, based on what we've learned up until this point, there are three things. The purpose of our existence, he says three things. Two of them we've talked about before, and the third one he's adding over here. The first one is Kayim mitzvos, to do mitzvos, right? To do mitzvos. And then he adds V'la avod, and to serve Hashem. And we spoke about this, I don't know, last week or 2 weeks ago, that these two things go together. For Kayim mitzvos, to do mitzvos, when we do the mitzvos, we're creating light. We're creating light.
I like this place way better than what another bagel.
But people have to mute themselves. We're getting background noise.
Yeah, I just muted everybody. Okay. Fine. So unmute yourself if you want to jump in with any comments. So we have mitzvahs. So mitzvahs, what are mitzvahs? Mitzvahs create the bond. Mitzvahs create the connection. Okay, but then there's a problem. If we hold on to our bad midos, if we hold on to our negative traits and our negative qualities, even if we're doing mitzvahs, we're still going to have these barriers that separate between us and Hashem. They act as mechitzas, barriers that prevent us from enjoying the connection that we're building through our mitzvahs. So that's la'avod. So mitzvahs means to do the mitzvahs, to do the positive commandments. La'avod means to work on our midos, to work on our attributes, to try to improve ourselves as human beings, to work on our kavana, our focus, our intent, our purpose, our commitment, and to work on who we are and the way we are in the world. And by doing that, we remove the barriers and we're able to experience the full level of connection. Okay, but then he adds the third thing over here, which is lamod b'nisayon, and that means to withstand the tests that one faces. Okay, and I think this is a really important thing to focus on for a minute over here, is that we have to know the word nisayon implies that there are going to be, by definition, tests and challenges along the way. Right? If it's easy, if it's too easy, and we're not being challenged, then we're not growing. So in order to make the connection and maintain this connection, there has to be that it's going to require that we stand up to tests and challenges. That we're going to be able to fight if necessary and push and challenge ourselves. And the problem is that if we don't do that, if we don't stand up to the tests and challenges, then automatically what happens is the Yetzer Hara creeps in. The Yetzer Hara takes over. The Yetzer Hara assumes control over us, and at that point we're just sort of in the grips of the Yetzer Hara. I wanted to just focus for a minute, a little bit, on this topic of how exactly it is that the Yetzer Hara manages to take hold over our lives. You know, we tend to think that that we know how to outsmart the Yetzer Hara, or 1 second, looking for a source over here. We tend to think that we have the ability to sort of override the Yetzer Hara with our own intellect and our own ability to fight and combat the Yetzer Hara. But the truth is that the Yetzer Hara is very, very, very smart and has approaches to enter into our psyche and into our way of being that we can't even imagine could ever happen. And then all of a sudden we find that before you know it, we're in the grips of the Yetzer Hara. Now I want to just give you a really, really amazing, incredible, beautiful insight from the Talmud on this very topic. And it goes back to a story in the Tanakh, in the book of Samuel. It's a story that we're all on some level familiar with. It's one that we've all heard or studied or spent some time looking into, and that's the story of David and Bathsheba. David and Bathsheba. Now, without going into all the details of the story, for now, let's just keep it on the very, very simple, basic level, that David made this choice. And the choice was that he had to take Bathsheba as a wife. And the problem, of course, was that Bathsheba had a husband who was out at war, fighting a battle against the Ammonites. And David basically did two things that were really, really difficult on a moral level. One is he sent the husband of Bathsheba out to the front line to fall in battle, purposely and knowingly fall in battle, so that he would be, no longer around. And then he could take Bathsheba and marry her and take her as a wife. Okay, so this was obviously very, very difficult morally, and we have to really, understand this story and what was going on to really make peace with what David was doing. But that's not my point for now. My point for now is what happened afterwards. What happened afterwards is that David had a relationship with one of the prophets of Israel, whose name was Natan or Nasan. And he was sort of like David's private or personal prophet. And his role was to come along and whenever he felt it was necessary to offer rebuke to the king for mistakes that he made from Hashem, as Hashem's mouthpiece, as Hashem's messenger. And when this whole story took place and it was all over, now, Uriah is dead, and David is now taken Bathsheba as a wife, and the story's kind of come to a conclusion. Nasan shows up, the prophet shows up to rebuke David and to inform him that he has made a very, very, very serious mistake. How does he offer that rebuke? That's what I want to focus on right now. So this is chapter 12 of Samuel 2. The book of Samuel is divided into two halves. Not by us, but much more recently, I think by the church, it was divided because it was a long book and they divided it into Samuel 1 and 2. So in chapter 12 of Samuel 2, the prophet Nathan shows up to rebuke David. And he does so in a very, very interesting way. He does so in the form of a parable. Let's take a look at the parable and then we'll discuss, first of all, why he chose to use a parable and what was the message exactly that he was trying to communicate. So here we go. So chapter 12, verse 1, and the Lord sent Nathan to David. Okay, and he came to him and he said, here goes the parable. There were two men in the same city, one rich and one poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds, but the poor man had only one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He tended it. He grew up together with him and his children. It used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup, nestle in his bosom. It was like a daughter to him, this lamb. One day a traveler came to the rich man, But he was loath to take anything from his own flocks or herds to prepare a meal for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. End of parable. And that's what Nathan presents to David. David flew into a rage against the man and said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He shall pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing," and showed no pity. And Nathan turns to David and said, "This man is you. You're the man. You're the guy." Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. First of all, why a parable? Why did Nathan, Nathan Hanavi, Nathan the prophet, approach David in this form of a parable? He was clearly trying to rebuke him. Why didn't he just show up and say, "Here's what you did. It was wrong. You did something wrong. Took this guy's wife. Shouldn't have done it. You're in big trouble." Why does he use the form of a parable?
Because it's more effective if the person themselves sees their error rather than if it's pointed out to them.
Okay, excellent. Right. I think that's the main idea was that he was trying to get David to be able to see the mistake he made. But as long as David is going to be defensive, if Nassim the Navi comes to him with a frontal approach and attacks him directly for what he's done, then David's initial reaction is more likely to be one of being defensive and to justify and rationalize why he did what he did. So when he takes David out of it and presents it as an objective story, the moral repugnance of the story becomes much more clear to David because he's not personally involved in the story, right? So he's able to understand, step aside and understand that it was wrong. That's part of it. Also, in general, the power of a parable is that it allows you to say things that you could never otherwise say because it's too brutal and too honest. I've told you this before, that there was a great teacher in Klal Yisrael who lived a couple hundred years ago, and his name, they called him the Dubno Magi. He was the Maggid of Dubno. Dubno was a place in Lithuania, and he was the Maggid. He used to go around from town to town, and he would come into a community and he would ask the rabbi, "Hey, what's going on here? What do the people need to work on? Where are the areas that people need, musar?" And he would come on and he would tell them, the rabbi would tell them, "Okay, this and this and this," and then the Maggid would go in and he would give a speech in the shul, and he would basically rebuke that community for whatever they were doing wrong, or point out wherever they needed to improve in their ways. And the way this used to work, the Dubno Maggid anyway, was that he would always rebuke the community and give them musar and words of reprovement in the form of a mashal, in the form of a parable. He never laid it on straight on. He would always tell a parable. And then they would be able to figure it out. And everything was a parable. Everything. So one time somebody came up to him afterwards and said, "Rabbi, I understand the message. Why don't you just tell it straight? Why do you always have to explain everything with a parable?" So what did the Dubno Maggid say? He said, "I'll answer you with a parable." And the parable was that there was once a wise man who had so much wisdom to share, and it was true and it was wise and it was beautiful, but there was one problem. The wise man had no clothes, so everywhere he would go naked. And every time he would come and sit down and try to sit down with somebody and try to share some wisdom with him, they would run away. They couldn't be in his presence. It was too embarrassing. It was too overwhelming. So what did he do? He went out and he bought some clothes, and then he was able to sit down and share information with people and share ideas with people and share wisdom with people. So he said the truth is too difficult. Oftentimes it's too difficult to confront the truth head on. It's too uncomfortable. It creates too much dissonance. I can't handle the truth in a very direct way. So the power of a mushal, the power of a parable is that I can communicate to you something very, very important and strong and even perhaps critical on some level, but you're going to be able to hear it and accept it because I've couched it in the form of a parable. So the reason why Nasan Hanavi, Nathan the prophet, comes to David over here to rebuke him in the form of a parable is A, because of what Jeffrey said, which is that he's much more likely to be able to hear it and not become defensive right away. And two is because sometimes the truth is just too naked and too raw and too difficult. So when you couch it in a parable form, it's much more acceptable for a person to hear. Okay, so then the prophet Nathan rebukes David in the form of a parable. Let's look at the parable one more time. Now I want to analyze the parable for a minute. Okay, everyone put on your thinking cup over here, and let's talk about who's who, and let's break down the parable. So in the parable, there were two men in the same city, one rich and one poor. Okay, so I will ask you, who in this parable, but everyone should unmute yourself for a second first so that no one has to struggle to unmute. Okay, who in this parable, who is the rich man?
David.
Howard, what'd you say?
David.
David. Everyone agree, disagree? Who agrees? Raise your hand if you agree. Raise your hand if you disagree. Okay. David is the rich man. Correct. And who is the poor man?
Bathsheba's husband.
What's his name?
I forgot his name.
Okay, that's not fair. That wasn't a fair question. Okay, his name is Uriah the Hittite. Uriah. Okay, correct. The poor man is Bathsheba's husband, Uri, who, somebody who has not answered yet, is the little ewe lamb.
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba. Okay, anyone disagree with that?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, she's the little lamb. There's no Mary in this parable. Okay, fine. That was the easy part. That was all the easy part. In verse 4, one day a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man was loath to take anything from his own flocks or herds to prepare a meal for the guest who would come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who would come to him, who, for $500, is the traveler.
Traveler.
Who would you say, Howard? Who is the traveler?
Yetzirah.
Ooh, wow. What a chacham. Okay. Correct. The traveler is the
Very good,
Yetzirah. The Yetzirah comes to the rich man, right? The Yetzirah comes to David. But David doesn't want to satisfy the Yetzirah with one of his own flocks, meaning with one of his own wives. So instead he takes the poor man's wife, which is Bathsheba, and he, am I being too loud?
No.
No, I think Ali just came. Rabbi Tversky is teaching upstairs in my living room right now. And he takes the poor man's wife, that's Bathsheba, and prepares it for himself. Okay, that's good. So we succeeded in breaking down the. But now look a little bit closer at verse 4. What is the name, in verse 4, what is the name given to describe the Yetzirah?
Traveler.
The guest. The guest.
Traveler, guest, any other answers?
The man.
Man, the man, okay? So he's described 3 different ways in this verse.
The rage,
Say it again.
rage that he flew into. The action of the rage that David flew into.
Oh, that's in verse 5. That's also good. Okay, that's also a good point. That's in verse 5. It's referred to as rage that David goes into. That's also Yetzer Hara. Okay. But in verse 4, this person that comes to David at the door, that the one that he prepares the food for, is described as a traveler, as a guest, and as the man. In one verse, he's described with 3 different words, right? In Hebrew, let's look at the Hebrew here for a second. In Hebrew, here it says V'yavo Helech. Helech is a wayfarer, traveler. The Isha Asher, he came to the wealthy man. V'yachmo lakach mitzono, v'bekaru la'asot la'areach. And he didn't want to give him from his own. He didn't want to give from his own flock to the oreach, which is a guest. And finally, it says he took from his own flock to give to the ish, the man. Okay. So the question is, what is he? Is he a traveler? Is he a wayfarer? Is he a guest, or is he a man? Look what the Talmud says over here. It's the Talmud Tractate Sukkah 52b. Right here, where it says, we're reading this paragraph. Okay, it says, Rava said, initially, the verse called the evil inclination traveler, coming from afar. Subsequently, the verse calls the Yetzer Hara a guest, as one welcomes it. Ultimately, the verse calls it man, indicating significance, as it has become the homeowner. As it is stated in the parable of the poor man's lamb, and it quotes the parable. Okay, so now we've seen something really, really incredible, an amazing, amazing insight into the nature of the Yetzer Hara. Very, very, very deep insight into the nature of the Yetzer Hara. In this mashal, in this parable, the Yetzer Hara takes on 3 personas as it seeks to lodge itself inside of David's psyche over here. Okay, and as it seeks to take control from us, as it seeks to wrestle control away from us as individuals. So the first persona, and this is not just for David, but this is for David and everyone else here, right? The first persona that the Yetzer Hara takes on, the Yetzer Hara doesn't come at you, guns blazing. Hey, I'm the Yetzer Hara and I'm going to take you down. That's not how the Yetzer Hara works at all. If only the Yetzer Hara worked that way, then I could be prepared. I would know when the Yetzer Hara is coming. I could have my arsenal ready. I could unlock my locker, my safes, and pull out my whatever I have and be ready to go against the Yetzer Hara. The arsenal's open and I've got my hand grenades and my rocket launchers and everything I need. But that's not how the Yetzer Hara works. The Yetzer Hara starts as a wayfarer, right? Someone who comes from the outside, someone who doesn't belong here, and comes from the outside and presents an opportunity for you, an opportunity. Okay? And that this is the most critical moment of all in the battle with the Yetzer Hara, the most critical moment. If you recognize at this moment that this wayfarer who's just come along and said to you, hey, you know what? Why don't you Google your old high school girlfriend? That seems like a good idea. That might be an interesting thing to do on a boring Sunday afternoon. Okay. I don't know where I came up with that example from. Just thinking about things, randomly. Hey, it might be a good idea to Google your old high school girlfriend. Okay. Now that critical moment, you can turn to the wayfarer and say, get the hell out of here. No one invited you. Nobody wants you here. Nobody likes you. Just get out of my house, slam the door, and send the wayfarer packing. Goodbye. Yeah, Howard, go ahead. Get on mute. Yeah.
Once he's in the house, you're gone, because once he's in
the house, you're gone. Okay, so at that moment, at that critical moment, if you slam the door and say, get the hell out of here. Just go away. That is a stupid idea, and I know who you are. Okay, if you do that, then at that moment, battle's won. This battle. He'll come back, he'll put on a new set of clothes, and he'll come back with a new idea. But you won the battle. Okay. But if you say, that's an interesting idea. You look like a nice visitor. You look like a nice wayfarer. Why don't you come into my house and be a guest? Become my guest. Enter into my house. Have something to eat. Have something to drink. Let's talk about this idea that you have some more. Let's discuss it. Okay. Then you're in trouble. At that moment, you have allowed the wayfarer, the Yetzer Hara, into the house. Now, there's still an opportunity at that point for you to turn around to the wayfarer, now become the guest in your house, and say, excuse me, with all due respect, I know I invited you in, but it was a mistake. I don't think this is the right place for you. Would you mind, please? I'm going to show you the door. It's time for you to leave. You can still kick the guest out. He's a guest. Okay. The nice thing about guests is you can kick them out. Somebody told me in Shabbos, he said, I got to tell you something, because we're talking about sometimes we have guests over on Shabbat on Friday night and they don't like to leave and they stay forever, He says, let me tell you what I do. He said, in Israel, all the houses, every house has its own Shabbat. All the lights in the house are connected to a Shabbos clock. And you set the timer, right? So he said, what I always do is I set the timer for the lights to go off at like 10 o'clock. And the lights go off, and then everyone says, okay, I guess, it's time to go, whatever. And then I set them to go back on at 10:15. Okay? So that's the way to get rid of your guests. I like that idea. So, you can get rid of guests. You can kick them out, but it's not as easy. Once they're guests in your house, it's uncomfortable. It's difficult. It's easier to get rid of them before you've invited them in. But you can, as long as they're a guest. But at that point, you don't turn to the guest and say, you know what? I'm sorry. I made a mistake. This is not really for me. I would appreciate it now if you please leave and show them the door and close the door and say goodbye. If you don't do that, then what happens? Then the wayfarer who became the guest now becomes the man of the house. He's taken over. He runs the house. You're under his control now. He's in control. He's the Baal Bias. He's in charge. And now you're the guest. And you're completely in his hands, completely under his control. That is the deep, deep message that the Talmud is telling us, that the prophet Nathan was saying to David when he explained to him the way the Yetzer Hara works. And this is incredible for us, right? This is a real, real lesson for us. And we have to find the strength to be able to muster the strength to be able to, first of all, recognize the Yetzer Hara when he's coming to us. And if we're being real, it's usually pretty easy. But have the strength to not invite him in, to kick him out before he gets in the house. But if he manages to get in the house, to be able to find the strength, even more strength, to be able to show him the door once he's come in, but not to let him come in and take over gradually in this sort of insipid sort of way to enter into our psyche, to wrestle control of our lives away from us. And if we don't, right, and if we let him remain the guest, and he becomes the man or the master of the house, and he makes himself completely at home, and he will have full control over our thoughts and our desires and our actions. Okay, so this is a very, very, very important lesson for us. Are we supposed to avoid physical pleasure altogether? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about now. But let's see, before we get to that, it seems like there might be a question. Yeah?
David,
Yes.
was that metaphor that you gave in the Talmud, or was that one that you came up with by yourself?
No, so the metaphor
No, I'm talking
itself.
about the metaphor about the high school girlfriend.
Oh, I made that one.
Yeah. Okay. Number one. Number two is Paula's Uncle Buddy used to get people out, not on Shabbos. He'd just get the vacuum cleaner out and start to vacuum. People sort of got the message. And the third thing is, doesn't the Yetzer Hara get stronger as we become more observant and serve God more. So to preserve free choice. Otherwise, we become exotic and not even tempted. What kind of free choice is that?
100%. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah. So wait a second. What comes first? Does the Yetzer Hara get stronger first, or do you give in and the Yetzer Hara takes over?
So the way it works, it starts with a challenge. It represents a challenge. And if you overcome the challenge, that's what we were talking about. The Ramchal said there are three things. There's the mitzvos, the avoda, and then the tests, the challenges, the nisyonot. So if we overcome a challenge, so we're a new person. We're on a new level. We're a higher person. We're a stronger person. We're a more committed, more dedicated person. And at that point, the Yetzer Hara has to up his game, and he's got to come back at you with some new weapon from his arsenal. Otherwise, it becomes too easy, and like you said, the free will eventually will disappear.
So
Okay.
where does the challenge come from? The challenge comes from Hashem.
Yeah, I mean, the Yetzer Hara is a shaliach from Hashem.
I got
The
you.
Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara is sent by Hashem to constantly test us and challenge us so that we can grow. Otherwise we just stagnate. Okay, so question now. Basically, we just had this whole discussion about the Yetzer Hara, the power of the Yetzer Hara, the way the Yetzer Hara can sneak into our lives and very, very quickly turn from the wayfarer into the guest, into the man of the house, the ish, the master of the house. So does that mean that Judaism advocates an approach of completely avoiding all forms of pleasure, all forms of physical pleasure? What we call, I'm going to teach you a phrase here, hana'ot ha'olam. Hana, the word hana'ah means pleasure. Hana'ot ha'olam means the pleasures of the world. Physical pleasures, okay? So are we supposed to avoid physical pleasures? Are we supposed to stay as far away from them as possible? Does Judaism advocate a life of privation, simplicity to the extreme? Living like a monk on top of a hill somewhere, taking a vow of silence, eating only, a vegetarian, vegan diet, God forbid, chas v'shalom. And I mean, for me, not for anybody else. But what is Judaism talking about over there? What is the message? So the Ramchal is about to tell us exactly how we are supposed to relate to physical pleasures in this world. So let's continue where we were. We were on 38 on the bottom. Okay, and we're 3 lines from the bottom, not in the notes, but in the center part of the text. And the pleasures of the world are worthy solely to be used as a help and an aid to a person, so that he will have contentment and peace of mind in order to be able to free his heart to focus on this service that rests upon him. Let's read that one more time. What is the purpose of the pleasures of this world? How am I supposed to relate to pleasure? When I say pleasure, I mean physical pleasure, food, drink, sexuality, whatever physical pleasures there are in this world. How is one supposed to relate to them? Am I supposed to avoid them at all costs? So the Ramchal says that the pleasures of the world, the hana'ot ha'olam, are positive, they're worthy, they have value, but their value is solely to be used as a help and an aid for a person. They're there to help me. Help me for what? For nachas ruach and yishuv hadas, contentment and peace of mind. I'll explain what this means in a minute. And in order to be able to succeed in this very, very serious avoda, this responsibility, this obligation of serving Hashem that's placed upon me. Okay, so this is the way we're supposed to look at the pleasures of the world. La'ezer u'lesiyua, for a help and assistance. Pleasures of the world are there for a purpose. They're there to help me. They're there to help me in my service of Hashem. How? By providing me with nachas ruach, I'll describe what these things are in a minute. And Yishuv Hadas. Okay, what does this mean? So we know that the body obviously has physical needs, breathing. I think that I volunteer on Fridays now once a week. I was doing it twice a week, but I don't have as much time now. So once a week I volunteer at this incredible place called Yad Sarah, and it's probably the largest gamach, medical gamach in the world. They lend out medical supplies to people who need them. There's 7,000. I told you there's 7,000 volunteers in Israel, and anybody can come in, and I mean anybody. And half the people we help are Jews, half of them are Arabs, religious, non-religious. Anybody comes in, and whatever they need, they take. They give a deposit. They put down their ID, so it's recorded in the system, and they take what they need. So recently, in the last month or so, there's been incredible demand for oxygen paraphernalia, oxygen balloons, oxygen tanks, oxygen machines. Because people who are sick with corona are having a hard time breathing, right? Having a hard time breathing, and they need oxygen. And they come to us to get oxygen tanks. It's really it's kind of how I can tell when corona is getting worse or better in the country. For the first month and a half, no one came in for oxygen. In the last 3 weeks, everyone was coming in for oxygen. This last week, Friday, less. So I don't know. I'm hoping that it's starting to go down. But there are things that the body needs: air, breathing, food, water. The things that the body needs. That's not what the Ramchal is talking about. He's not saying that we only use the physical world to satisfy the bare minimum needs of physical things that we need to stay alive. He's not talking about that. He's talking about pleasure, actual things that are pleasurable, physical pleasures. And they're not meant to be avoided. They're meant to be used. They're meant to be enjoyed. Hashem gave us pleasures to enjoy. But the key thing over here is to understand that those pleasures in the physical pleasures, food, good food, money, sexuality, vacations, good weather, whatever it is, whatever the physical pleasures are in the world, they're there for us to use and enjoy. But they cannot become the goal. They can't become the purpose. They can't be what I'm pursuing. You're not pursuing those things. They're there to help me along the way in my pursuit of what I am pursuing, which is avodah, service of Hashem. I'm pursuing a relationship with Hashem. That's what I'm pursuing in my life. Connection to Hashem. Performance of his mitzvos to build a connection. Working on my midos to remove the barriers that exist between us. That's what I'm pursuing. The hana'ot ha'olam, the pleasures of this world, are there to help me along the way in the pursuit of what I'm pursuing. And they help me because they give me two things, right? The physical pleasures, vacations. I think we're going to try to go on a vacation this weekend. Levi has a few days off from the army. And he'll have a few days off from school. So we're going to try to go to a lot for Shabbos, Sunday, Monday. Go to a lot, try to do some hiking, whatever. Warm down there. It's beautiful. The water's warm. So we're going to try to take it. So what's the role of that? What's the role of that? Or, going out and having a nice meal, or buying some nice clothing that you like, or some nice jewelry, or buying a car that you like, not buying just a old jalopy that'll take you from place to place, but a car that you enjoy driving. What's the role of these things? So if they become what I'm pursuing as a goal, as an end, then you got a problem. But if they're there to help me along the way for two things, then the Ramchal says, go for it. What are those two things? First one is nachas ruach. Nachas. What does it mean? I like my life. I'm happy. I like life. I wake up and I'm happy. I enjoy my life. It's a good thing. We're supposed to enjoy our lives. We're supposed to be happy. We're supposed to be happy to be on this planet. I wake up and I'm happy that I'm on the planet. And one of the things that helps me to be happy that I'm on the planet is that I have a nice car to drive in, or that I have a nice, beautiful house to live in, or that I can go on vacation for a few days with my family, or I can go to a nice restaurant with friends. I enjoy my life. we're supposed to have that. You're supposed to use the pleasures of this world to give you nachas ruach, to have pleasure, to enjoy your life. That's one. And the other one is yishuv hadas, to be settled in my mind, to not have stress and anxiety all the time. If you have stress and you have fear and you have anxiety and every day you're worried, what's going to be? How am I going to make it through the day? How am I going to feed my family today? What's going to happen at work? What's going to be with my home? I don't know if I'm going to be able to heat all the things, all the stressors, all the fears and anxieties that people have in life. When you have those fears and anxieties, they don't allow you freedom of mind, the peace of mind, the yishuv hadas, the wherewithal, the peace of mind, I guess, to be able to serve Hashem. If I'm going to be able to serve Hashem, I have to be able to not be preoccupied and worried and stressed and anxious about everything that's going on in my life. So having certain things and enjoying certain things gives me that yishuv hadas also. So the hana of the world, the pleasures, the physical pleasures of the world, if they are the purpose of your life, if you're pursuing them as the goal and that's what you're out for, then they can be very negative, they can be very destructive, they can be very harmful, they can take things over and take the meaning and purpose out of your life. But if they're there for nachas ruach, so I like my life, I'm happy, enjoy waking up in the morning because I know that I'm going to have some nice things today to enjoy. And they remove the stressors and the anxiety and the fear and they give me peace of mind, then they could be very, very positive. Okay. And of course you have to then, maybe we'll stop here because I want to answer Jeffrey's question for a second also, but then maybe this is the place to stop and we'll review here. But then of course you have to then be able to make an honest assessment and analysis about what are the pleasures, what are the types of hana'ah, what are the types of pleasures, and when are the pleasures appropriate, when are the appropriate times for pleasures, and in what context are those pleasures appropriate to be able to help me and to give me the nachas ruach that I need and the yishuv hadas that I need to be able to enjoy my life and not be overwhelmed and not be stressed. And at what point am I crossing the line between using those pleasures of the world to help me in my purpose of serving Hashem and doing mitzvahs and working on my midos, versus at what point do they slip over into the pursuit and the goal of what I'm trying to achieve and get in my life, right? And I think we all know people, and probably we've all been at some point in our lives that person who gets a little confused and we start pursuing physical pleasures for physical pleasures for the purpose that becomes the pursuit. We have to discuss that and we have to go into that, and we'll pick it up there next week. Just quickly to answer the question, Jeff wanted to know the chapter heading, so to speak, on how do we say Judaism is not a religion? So first of all, the proof that Judaism is not a religion is that with every other religion, when you say that you no longer adhere to the basic beliefs or fundamentals, tenets of belief of that religion, then at that point you're considered to be an ex-Christian, an ex-Muslim, an ex-Mormon. Okay, if you say I don't believe in Joseph Smith ever lived, and I don't believe that his glasses miraculously translated the Book of Mormon for him, and I don't believe that, blah, 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 then you're not like a non-practicing Mormon, you're an ex-Mormon, right? Or if you say I don't believe that Jesus ever lived, and I don't believe there ever was a New Testament, and I'm not getting baptized, and I'm not going to church, you're not a non-practicing Christian, you're an ex-Christian. But if you're a Jew and you say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe there was a Torah, I don't believe that Moshe ever received the Torah, I don't believe there's any commandments, and I don't believe that you should eat herring and cholent on Shabbos, what are you? You're a Jew, period. That's it. Doesn't change, because Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is something more than a religion. It's really, if anything, it's closest to what the Torah refers to as an am, which is a nation, a people. And there is a religious component to Judaism, to this nation. We do have a religious part of our peoplehood, but to limit Judaism to being a religion, and also becomes very destructive, because then as soon as a person is, let's say, non-observant, or let's say they're born into a secular family, or a generations of non-observant or unaffiliated families. So if Judaism is a religion, if I think in my mind Judaism is a religion, and I'm not practicing the religion, then it becomes harder and harder for me to identify myself as being a Jew. But if you understand that Judaism is much more than a religion, of course, religion is an important component of religion to Judaism, but a person can be as secular as they come and still be part of Am Yisrael, and still be part of the Jewish people, and still be an important part of the Jewish people, and play an important role in the Jewish people. Then it's empowering. And then at that point, a person says, of course I'm a Jew, and I'm a proud Jew. I'm an empowered Jew, and I'm an important Jew, and I play a role in the nation. It may not be a religious role, but at least I'm doing something important, and I feel strong as a Jew. So that's why it's really important to understand that Judaism is not a religion, and it's the nation, it's a people. The closest thing you can compare to is a people. Now, typically, a nation shares common land, language, and culture. That's normally how you define what a nation is. A nation is usually a group of people that share a common land, common language, and a common culture. And the Jewish people, for 2,000 years at least, for the most part, did not share common land, language, and culture, only in theory. We theoretically shared a common land, but no one lived in Israel. People lived in Russia and France and Germany and South America and North America. We didn't share a common language, right? Everyone spoke the language of the land that they lived in. That's why it's so difficult to learn Hebrew when you make Aliyah, because you didn't speak Hebrew growing up. And certainly cultures differ heavily between the Moroccans and the Iraqis and the Ashkenazim and the Germans and the French, and common language and culture was missing for 2,000 years. It's starting to come back, but we were still a nation all that time, because normally nations are defined by common land, language, and culture. We are a nation, as Rav Saadia Gaon, the great tzaddik from 1,500 years ago, said, we are a nation by virtue of our Torah. For us, it's the Torah that binds us as a nation. It's what kept us, it's what created us as a nation, and it's what kept us as a nation, our connection to the Torah. So even without land, language, and culture, we were able to maintain an identity as being part of an Am, part of a nation, throughout all the millennia of exile. But yeah, that's the basic deal. Sorry to have to jump off, but I'm supposed to meet somebody at 7 o'clock in Manila. You guys remember Doron Kornbluth? Friend of ours who's spoken a bunch of times at the Chaim. Want to see him? Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good class.
All right, everyone have a great week, and be in touch, and we'll see you during the next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Hopefully
Rabbi.
I'll have the beach of a lot behind me in my background next Sunday when we land.
Don't rub it in.
If it works out. If not, I'll do a virtual background. All right. Bye, everybody.
Enjoy.